What's up, everyone? Adam Gelman here, back with another video. Really excited to make these. We've gotten such tremendous feedback for our different videos that we've been doing, whether that's the title match series, the ones that I've been doing around Tale of the Tape, and other things. Like it's been so much fun to be a part of the community and delivering these types of different content that really has taught me how to use this platform really well over the last few months. And I'm excited that people are taking so much information out of it. Gotten such great feedback on Facebook and Instagram and stuff like that from the people who watch these videos and learn about aspects of the hobby. And really what I've been trying to do in a lot of ways is use the Wrestling Trading Card Network platform to as a source of education or information or perspective. And it's really been something that I never expected to have as much fun as I'm doing with it. So thank you. I did take a little bit of a break coming out of Thanksgiving, spend some time with my family, do some of those things. But I wanted to take the time today to go through one of the more controversial subjects that have come out of the hobby community over the last probably 6 to 12 months, and that's WWE Prizm. For a long time, Prizm has been the standard in a lot of different areas of the hobby. It's new to WWE. It's driven a wedge in a lot of ways between parts of the community. And I think people are kind of avoiding talking about it in a sort of balanced way. So I wanted to take a look at this product and really dive deep into it and take some time to sort of understand really what worked well, what didn't work well, kind of what's the overall sort of standpoint of why those things are the way that they are, and use this as an opportunity to sort of clarify the conversation, because I think the conversation on social media is either 100% positive or it's 100% negative. There's very little in between. Let's take this down the middle a little bit and see where things have gone well and where things haven't as gone as well, and use that as an opportunity to have a discussion. So let's look at this with a little bit of context from history here, because last week was actually the 10th anniversary of the first release of NBA Prism. Actually, wasn't the first Prism product. I think I've mentioned this in a couple of videos, but Prism actually was released in football first in 2012 with a historic draft class, and it was thought of as really a ripoff of Topps Chrome because, unlike basketball, Topps was still very much in football, and those cards were going for a ton of money comparatively to the rest of the football card hobby. Like those were the card, like the rare chrome cards in football were the cards to have. So when Panini came out with Prism, it was just seen as a way to sort of capitalize on that. But basketball, when that was released, completely different hobby reaction, and it really spurred a new era of the way that the hobby engaged with different cards. So as 2013, 2014, 2015, especially Prism came out, like you saw an evolution of the product in a way that wasn't, I think, the original intent. And that was what drove a lot of this sort of fun experience that we're having with rainbow collecting and things like that that has taken place in the hobby, especially in WWE recently, is because like that whole part of the hobby is what drove a lot of the um, releases of Prism leading up to the boom era, which is only the last couple of years. So prior to this, Prism, like I said, it really wasn't seen as like this huge investment level asset. But once the hobby sort of caught on and saw that Prism was quickly becoming the flagship brand for Panini, um, in especially as this boom era came in and like COVID hits and thousands of new people join the hobby. Panini is the only game in town in basketball and football, which is like one of the largest premium sort of collectible level sports, as opposed to baseball, which is much more focused on set collecting and stuff like that. So when all of these new people came into the hobby, especially as they ramped up 2013, 2014, 2015, um, they were experiencing Prism as the flagship set for the only game in town. So like then in 2016 to 2017, when Patrick Mahomes is a rookie in football, Luka Doncic is a rookie in basketball, like all of a sudden these cards are becoming investment level assets. So as the COVID boom hits the hobby, like people are gravitating much more towards those cards and national treasures and stuff like that over the traditional sort of like set collector type sets and things like that because they're seen as premium level collectibles. And I think that's where the history of this sort of meets with what's going on with WWE is because as Panini expanded to other brands, NASCAR, WNBA, UFC, Prism was always the first brand that they went in with. So as those sets performed above what was normally expected for those brands, people started to expect that that was going to be the case with a lot of different places that they went. So these new sort of experiences that collectors were having with cards as an investment piece really are driven by Prism and things that Prism is sort of reinforcing within the hobby. Like for a long time, products were built to hit a certain target market. And so the target market for these types of products are much different than what we were seeing, especially in WWE leading up to it. And that's where I think a lot of these things take context from and sort of framing the discussion. So originally Prism was three parallels, right? You had the base card, you had the silver, and you had the gold. Like that was it. And so when they continually came back and back and back and back with these products, people always went back to the original parallels because collectors love firsts. So I think we'll talk about some of this as we get into what worked and what didn't work. But overall, like Panini built this product to be a direct correlation to every other product that they've ever released in Prism. Like there is a natural evolution that starts in 2012 and goes all the way up through recent releases, even in basketball and football. And I think WWE is a direct result of all of that history and all of that legacy because Panini wants this to appeal to a wide range of collectors. Topps usually was building products that were specifically appealing to wrestling collectors. And unlike the other sports where there's a lot of crossover between basketball and football and baseball collectors all sort of collecting those sports, there isn't as much crossover on the wrestling side. People that collect wrestling are usually only collecting wrestling. There's some crossover, especially now with all these huge amounts of people coming in. But for the most part, the Topps products were either copy and paste from baseball with less parallels and less things to chase because the product is smaller, or they're wrestling specific products that they know wrestling collectors are going to appreciate. Here, Prism is built almost entirely to support the existing ecosystem that Panini has built and capitalizes on the brands that have come before it and have been successful. So, really, from a historical context, that's really what's different here. And I can see why that's such a challenge for people to grasp. But if you were to sort of indoctrinate yourself to the goings on of the mainstream hobby, what's going on with Prism WWE wouldn't be shocking, and what's included in Prism WWE wouldn't be shocking as well. So I think the education level of certain aspects of the hobby isn't as prominent in the wrestling community. So to have that sort of tie-in between what came before, what is understood to be the case, why the hobby functions the way that it does, like that doesn't exist in spades here. So when wrestling is exposed to it, there's obviously a culture clash that happens a lot of times. So we'll get to some of that here, but I just wanted to give that historical context first and foremost. Okay, so let's talk about what worked well. And I think there's a lot of things to discuss here that really did wonders for this set. And I think there's a lot of other potential aspects of the impact of the set that have positive sort of connotations within the hobby, even though a lot of the people that have hugely negative opinions on Prism feel like the negatives far outweigh the positive. I want to discuss both because the positive really don't get a lot of time on social media. You see a lot of negativity around Prism, and I think it's time to sort of explore both sides of it. And the good thing about Prism is that the cards themselves have driven a considerable number of events to happen. So I'm going to go through some of those things, but I also want to take some time to sort of individually express what I think are the things that worked really well for Prism. First, let's start at the top. When we look at Prism as a set, that's one thing. Let's look at Prism as an impact because it has brought a huge amount of people and a huge amount of attention, positive or negative, to wrestling cards. That is a very good thing. And I think the reason that I say that is twofold. One, Panini spent a ton of money on this license, more like I think triple to quadruple what Topps was spending. So to see that people are engaging with the product, buying the product, ripping the product, which I think they did in mass, like that's very, very good. And I think one of the reasons is because they've established this brand as a legacy component of their initial brand strategy. When Panini acquires a new brand, the first thing they do is they go in and they release a Prism set, as I said. And I think the reason they do that is because it is a flagship standard for their brands. It's the appetizer for everything that they're going to do over the course of their license. And it's been received in every brand that they've launched very positively. Like you look at NASCAR, WNBA, UFC especially, like when they release a Prism brand, things go generally right. They've established a historic, sort of focus that when they release the first Prism set, cards are worth a lot of money. That happened in football, that happened in basketball, because if you go back, even though it's years after the fact that those achieved those values, the first Prism cards and first silvers, first golds of all the top stars are usually 5 to 6 figure cards, especially in high grades. And I think that has set the tone for a lot of the reasons why people consider Prism to be the investment standard across the hobby. So when they're bringing all of these new people who want to participate in that, it really does bring a level of validation for all the people that have been here for as many years as we have. Um, there's a lot of reasons why the hobby itself was sort of split on Prism because of the types of people that were coming in. Investors are dirty people for a lot of people in this hobby, but in reality, it brings a sort of validation that the time and money that you've spent to curate your collection and become a top producer within the wrestling card hobby really is now going to get the focus that it probably deserved all along. Wrestling was always a dark corner of the hobby universe. Like there was never as many people as something like football or basketball or baseball. It was probably fourth or fifth tier level hobby, but because of Panini's involvement with the license and the release of Prism, that has grown significantly. We in the Facebook group that I help moderate, like we used to get like 20 requests a month, if that. Now we're getting like 20 requests a day of new people that want to come in and engage with wrestling cards. Like that's cool. Like even though you may have a mix of people from being good versus bad, however you want to categorize them, there's going to be valuable people to the community that will come in during this wave. We've already seen that across a number of aspects, especially if you're looking at just social media in general, how many people are now part of the conversation, the dialogue on how wrestling cards should be engaged with. But it also validates Panini's spend on the license. And I think, let's say that Panini has this for 5 more years, and Fanatics takes over. This really has shown to them that wrestling cards are worth the investment. And there's a lot of people here who really enjoy collecting wrestling cards and really investing in wrestling cards. So it's good for them to continue investing in the license. If Panini's the one that is continually making these sets, like they're going to continue to evolve, they're going to continue to put more autographs, more cool stuff into the checklist. Like that doesn't happen if they see this be a complete wasteland of collector experience. And I don't think it has been, even though the wax prices come down considerably. Like I don't think in any way, shape, or form it's shown that it's not a valuable product or an impactful product overall. The second thing is I think the cards look really good, really good. And a lot of people want to talk about the negative aspects of the wax being what it is, but let's be frank here. Like, there's a lot of cards in my display. You can see it behind me that are Prism focused. Like, they look really good. The champion signatures, the dual signatures, the color blast, like all those cards are really awesome. Wrestling cards. They focus on the things in wrestling that I really like. Champions, iconic moments, cool rivalries. Like all of those things dictate what make wrestling interesting. And I think Prism captured a lot of that. Now, am I upset that they're not on card autographs? Of course. But I also recognize that the set came out in April. They could only start making everything in January. So when you have to print the cards, get them to the superstars, and then pack them out, like an on card autograph probably isn't going to work this time. That doesn't mean it can't happen in the future. But traditionally, like the Prism cards aren't driven by the autographs. They're driven by the base cards and the parallels and the rare desirable cards there. And those were done really well. We either got, great photographs of finishing moves, of entrances, like stuff that means something to wrestling collectors. And I think a lot of those action shots were really awesome and really cool to see in practice because we've all been driving, collections for many, many years. Some of us even more than that. And for a long time, like the things that drive us to be collectors are cards that we think look good. And I think Prism did a really good job with that. Like looking at the inserts that they did, They're just they from a subjective opinion, which is my own. I know some people may not agree with this, but like I think the ways that the parallels were done, the borders of the cards, matching a lot of the fun sort of elements of the colorful wrestling characters, like that really did a good job in Prism. Um, it doesn't mean like there's aspects of that that didn't work as well, but I think there's an overwhelming sense that the set produced some really cool looking cards. And I think as we get further and further into the evolution of this set over the years 2, 3, and 4, like this is just the first step in this, and collectors love first of all, but secondly, I think they nailed it in a lot of ways with their first go at it, which is really cool to see. They didn't like the first football set and the first basketball set were not good looking in my opinion, and like I think this has evolved dramatically since that point. Again, they've also brought a huge focus to rookies, which I think is really cool as well because it's a concept within the hobby that has been a focus for almost 50 to 100 years. Like the first card a player has in a major set is always a collectible item. And Panini did a really good job making rookies a big focus of the set. They put a ton of new people in here. They really got as many of those licensed individuals into the set. So that was really cool. But it's really brought value up for rookies across the hobby. Like rookies that were selling at very low prices because wrestling collectors really never saw that as a major focus for their collections was changed when a lot of new sports related people came into this and started collecting wrestling cards. They wanted more rookies and they started looking for rookies, and things that represent that went way up. So I think it's that's an awesome sort of change as well because I love rookie cards too. And if you look at the overall checklist, like I think this was a landmark checklist. Like they've gotten some people on here that I never thought would be a part of a WWE set. Like Batista signing WWE cards, that had never happened before. People that were included in these autograph sets hadn't had autographs before. And some of them had, but there was a lot of focus on the rookies and getting their first signatures in, a lot of focus on legends that hadn't signed before, getting their autographs in. There's still a lot left to be desired for year two, so they didn't chew off the entire meat off the bone, which could be seen as a negative too. But it's also something that gives some hope for year two and the collectability of those sets. And I think like they really did a good job getting everybody that they could onto a card, save some of the missing individuals that we'll talk about later on here. But that checklist is something that I remember looking at it and being like, wow, how did they get that person? Like that alone is really cool. For a long time with Tops, everybody's like it's the same people over and over again. There's no variety. There's no legends. Like here, we got Hulk Hogan, we got Steve Austin, we got The Undertaker, we got all of these guys signing Triple H, you name it, the Shawn Michaels, Bret Hart, all of those guys throughout all of these different checklists. But we also got some new folks as well, and it was a flagship set. Like Topps never really made Stone Cold Steve Austin available in a flagship set in a really common aspect. So most collectors never got their chance to have a Stone Cold Steve Austin autograph. Same thing with The Undertaker, same thing with Hulk Hogan. Like a lot of those things didn't happen in top sets because it's expensive and it's really hard to get those people onto a card and not have to pay and not realize that it's probably a negative loss against the P&L from that specific product. So like seeing that they were able to get a set with Roman Reigns and John Cena on one card, Hulk Hogan and Bill Goldberg on one card, like that doesn't happen in a flagship set like this. And Panini has really done a lot of really good things with the investments. Um, Additionally, and really a huge thing is they've gotten this on WWE programming. So like we've seen advertisements for Panini products, Prism specifically on Monday Night Raw. We saw it on SmackDown. We saw it on NXT. Like that never happened with Topps, as far as I can remember. It may have happened way back, but not recently. And I think that really opened up like a huge amount of eyes to see the billion social media followers that WWE has and all of these different things. Like those people saw that WWE card collecting is here. And a lot of them are fans who want to engage with the product because they love wrestling, not because they love cards. And I think that was one of the reasons that I was really excited to see that happen. I think for a long time, Topps and WWE kind of had a relationship that we're just going to make the cards and you're going to give us a license. Like Panini really seems like they're working with WWE to get cool things into the cards. Like whether that's the shirt relics that they're using for Select and for Impeccable or advertising on TV. Like Prism was really the first part of that, and it's really cool to see. Lastly, I think like when we look at the investment level quality of these cards, like we have seen record sales, and that is something that can't be denied. Like things in Prism sell for when they're rare and desirable, sell for astronomically more money than what we've seen in any other set. And the reason why that's so important is because it shows that it's not just kind of a throwaway hobby. And that needs to be a really key aspect of this because it will show everybody who is on the outside looking in to continue to value their wrestling cards. Like I'm not planning on selling any of my Becky Lynch collection, but I definitely want to make sure that the money I spent doesn't go to waste. Like I don't have an unlimited funds, and I want to make sure that the money I spent continues to be a high level and continues to be produce value in the cards. It also, like I said, validates some of the things that time and energy I put into this. Like I have a real job, and like my by the hour sort of thing is really high. So to spend the time kind of money that I did in investing my time to find these cards, like that's really key to me. Even though I'm not going to be selling them, even though I'm not an investor, like it is something that I want to be validated. And seeing that the Rocks card, like Drake Magruder, who owns the Rock Gold, said, "Hey, I bought this for a major amount of money." Like he said he valued it at $33,000 when he bought the Rock Gold. Like that's more money than I've ever seen a Rock card sell for. We also saw the Black Rock sell privately. So when the Rock Black 101 sells and the person that buys it says it was close to a six-figure deal, like you can take that as you will. But like let's say it's not even it's still even if it's not $100,000, if it's $75,000, like that's still a gigantic price for a WWE card. And like we saw Stone Cold Steve Austin sell for a ton of money. We saw Bret Hart sell for a ton of money, like 25 grand. We saw Shawn Michaels sell for $20,000. Like those things never happened before Prism. And even though they may not sell for that much amount of money again for a while now, like those sales were done and those cards change hands. And even more than that, like when you see Ultimate Warrior sell on eBay for $15,000, you see Becky Lynch sell for $10,000. Like those prices don't happen very often. Even recently, we saw Sasha Banks sell for 6 grand. We saw Gable Steveson sell for 5 grand. Like those used to be once in a year, once every 2 years type of sales. We saw those sales happen in a back to back to back to back to back to back situation. Like that has never happened. And that's crazy to think that after all of that, after all of the things that went down, those cards are still selling for that amount of money is just great to see. It shows the investment level quality that our collections will continue to exist within. And for some, it's like, well, those are hyper inflated, blah, blah, blah. They're private sales. Who cares? Like, I'm telling you, like, this is what drives a hobby to continue to exist in a high level fashion with a ton of people in the community contributing to the discussion, contributing to everything. Lastly, I think it can really it can bring this to the mainstream. And when things go to the mainstream, it may not happen overnight, it may not happen over a year, but it's something that as more and more people see these prices and more people continue to say, wow, wrestling cards are cool, better things will happen for wrestling cards. And though you may not agree with the type of people that are coming in, I'm pretty sure most people want to see wrestling cards continue. So that's really my sort of overview of the good things. We're going to get on to the bad things next year. All right, let's talk about some of the things that didn't work for Prism because there are a lot of them. Just like there were a lot of good things that happened, there was a lot of really bad things too. And I think there's a lot of things that didn't work very well. And I think when we get to the discussion of this, this is where everybody sort of gravitates toward. This is where most of social media has gone. This is where a lot of the discussion is focused around because for a long time, um, wrestling cards were one way. This was the beginning of a new era. And whenever that happens, people like to focus on the negative because it will help to further that the people that were here first are more important to the hobby. The products that were here first are always going to be better. Like those are really the ways that it went down in 2012 when Prism was first released, and up until like the hobby boom. Like this all happened before. Like everything I'm going to discuss and all the feelings that people have on this is not new. Like the hobby has gone through this already. So when I'm speaking about this, like you have to realize, like I saw this happening in real time. I'm like, wow, I thought we would be able to get past this because we have a great community. It doesn't seem like we are. So let's focus on these things that didn't work very well, and I'll start where the people usually sort of go to, and that's the wax. Um, Prism wax started super high and is now at an all-time low. Systematically, everything in the hobby has gone back and reverted to the mean in a lot of ways. Prism faster than the most, more so than most. And I think there's a lot of reasons why that happened. The timing was bad. Like everything that was happening around the hobby tended to start when Prism was released. Like all of these things, hobby wide, really trace back to April as really the beginning of that downturn that we're now in the middle of when this is being recorded. Like we're seeing cards all over the place, just completely fall off the ladder. You see what's going on in the price aggregators. You're seeing index prices dropping by 10-30%, 10 to 30%. Like all of these things are not going the right way. It all started in around the same time that Prism did. And because Prism WWE and WWE in general was on the fringe of a lot of these things, it dropped first. And that was something I said originally when Prism was coming out. I was like, because this is a fringe hobby, like they're like when the boom subsides and when the boom sort of takes its downturn, the places that people weren't expecting to spend money, those will be the places that are first expected or first impacted by this drop. This is exactly what happened. But let's look at why it got so high in the first place. Like if you're not familiar with how products get from the manufacturer to a collector, there's a number of steps involved. It's not like up until very recently, you couldn't even buy a box directly from a manufacturer. Now you can buy them on their websites. But usually what happens is the product is solicited a number of months ahead of time, and the manufacturers will go to their distributors and solicit pre-orders. And what ends up happening is that the price that the manufacturer sells to the distributor is not always the price that they're expecting to sell that to the end consumer. So when the manufacturers sell a box to a distributor, they sell it at a very low cost. Then the distributor takes that and sells it to a shop or to a breaker or to sometimes different people within the hobby who are buying in large quantities. Those people, the shops, are then selling to the end consumer. People have to make money at each level of that. So the manufacturers have to make money on their license when they sell to a distributor. They do that by incorporating a price that will give them a return on the product cost. So if the product costs $1 million to make, they're going to sell it to distributors to make $2.5 million or whatever. That's just an example. Then the distributors have to sell it to a hobby shop and they have to make money. So there's margin built in there. And then even more than that, the shops have to sell it to a consumer for margin, or the shops don't make money. So there's literally four levels of places where prices can be increased. And during the 2020 time frame, everybody was selling prices well above what MSRP was. You were talking about National Treasures having an MSRP of like $500 a box, selling for 15,000. Like that had never happened in the hobby before. We saw Prism boxes, especially in basketball, that were MSRP $150, just like wrestling was, selling for $5,000 to $6,000. Like those things were very commonplace. So the speculative persons, the people responsible for setting the prices at these distributors were looking at this from a speculative manner. They were selling, "Hey, I'm going to buy this from the manufacturer at $150, and I'm going to sell it to my hobby shops at $500 a box, and then they're going to sell it at $700 a box to their end consumers." What ended up happening is like the online distributors, so Blowout Cards, DA, Steel City, all of them immediately took their allocations from Panini because they get it direct, and they said they sold it to us at this price. Our first go at this, we're going to put it at $700, and it sold out almost instantly. So you can imagine if they're going to put something out in the market and it doesn't sell, then that's one thing. These guys put it out in the market and sold through absolutely very fast. Then, not only that, they took a second allocation, which is another shipment, and they said, well, we sold it out at $700 before. We're a business. We're going to put it at $900 this time. And guess what? That sold out too. So, like, you can see from like if you've never had the experience of how the card business works, like the speculative prices that are set by these online retailers dictate a lot of what shops are selling their stuff for, what it's selling for on eBay. Like all of these things really are dependent on how these online retailers are setting their market. Sometimes they're being told by distributors this is what you should sell it at. Sometimes they're setting those prices on their own. Like this isn't like Panini going to them and saying, oh, you should sell it at this amount of money, even though we're selling it to you at this amount of money. That's not allowed. That's illegal. But what it is like Panini is selling them to them at a very low price, and then everybody else is sort of saying, well, we're going to make a ton of money on this, so let's put it at this price. Now, for a while, you saw box prices at 1,200 bucks selling, and then everything sort of started to see that maybe this isn't the product that we maybe the market that we were expecting to come in on this isn't there yet. So the prices started coming down, and then the social media thing, it was just a big snowball effect, and now prices are pretty much back to 200 bucks a box, whatever it might be. So yeah, we were seeing something happen where the market was responding in a certain way and we made assumptions, and then once those assumptions sort of took hold and the boxes reached 1,200 bucks, we were like, oh wow, we were wrong. Like we thought that they would continue to down the path of what UFC was going to go down, which ended up being about $2,000 a box. The problem is like these products are built at 150 bucks. So they're not going to deliver the value that people are expecting unless these high level hits are selling for the way that they usually do. And they still are. Like I think the tent poles usually determine how a wax price will hold, but I think they ran into a couple of things. One, we were on the verge of an economic recession. Crypto crashed like to an insane amount of numbers. So a lot of the high end sort of Prism type investors have huge crypto sort of ties to their business and stuff like that. That crashed. The gas prices started going insane. The economy, inflation, everything, like the hobby took a nosedive. By now, we're in a spot where everybody is kind of like, "Oh my God, the sky is falling." Back then, this is just the beginning of this. So, as a fringe area of the hobby, of course, that was the first place people ran away from. And we saw card values drop, we saw wax value drop, all of this stuff can just fell off a cliff. We were very wrong. Like I'm the first person to admit, like I thought that this was going to be a slam dunk product. For a lot of reasons, it is. For a lot of other reasons that relate to sort of the secondary market piece of it, like it really hasn't performed any of the way that I expected it, my friends expected it to, and that's fine. Like I understand that there's market challenges that affect every product, and you can call me stupid, you can call me whatever you want. I had a lot of fun with Prism, regardless. Like I had a fun collecting the rainbows, I had fun collecting the cards I wanted. Like that didn't change just because the wax price dropped. Like that's how I judge things, and like if we're looking at single performance on the back end, like a lot of the cards are still selling for insane amount of money. Like a Naomi card sold for 800 bucks, Ivy Nile 750 bucks. Like those people don't achieve those prices in normal Tops products. Those people don't achieve those in normal Panini products. Prism they do. And it's like because there's this notion that Prism is this flagship set. But I think what we're seeing in the wax prices is not good. Like it is a failure in that respect. Like we expected as a market to see it perform similar to the way UFC did. It did not. Things have come down significantly. So has everything else. Like this was not a really well shaped market, and I think the addressable market was speculated upon at one level, ended up being much closer to the others, and that's fine. I think over time we're going to see people come back to this product because this isn't a 1 year thing. This isn't something that just is one and done, even if it's Fanatics that's eventually producing it. Like, I think Prism has a long term hold in a lot of reasons. But yeah, the wax price did not perform well. And that's just not something I expected to happen. And I'm not excited that it happened, but it is something that doesn't impact my collection at all. I think it's just something that happens when things go the way that it has in the regular hobby. So that's number one. I think we're also seeing that it's created this huge rift in the community. Like one of the reasons that I stayed with wrestling cards after coming in 2017 is I love the community. Like I've said this in so many of my videos. Like the community of wrestling card collectors is awesome, and I consider myself a collector, not an investor. Like I don't sell anything that I keep. Like I have a giant personal collection, and I buy and sell what I rip from wax, but like most of it is just to get more cards for my PC. Like, so I was part of this community and I saw, you know, the sort of the gatekeeping that was happening coming into Prism. Oh, you're not part of the original hobby. You're not a collector. You're an investor. You're bad for us. You're bad for my understanding. Like, I completely understand why that happened, and I completely understand why that happened because it happened originally too. Like the same exact sort of feelings happened when this all went down in 2013, 2014, when the investment crew really started to pick up on cards as a collectible asset. And so when Prism comes in and you have a bunch of wrestling collectors who haven't had experience in the mainstream hobby, don't want experience in the mainstream hobby, and now they're being faced with a wild wave of new people coming in, like, it's understandable to me why those new people would be seen as negative. A lot of people don't want their stuff to get more expensive to acquire. They want the stuff they own to get more valuable, but they don't want it to be expensive to get new stuff. They don't want to be at the back of the line. They want to be at the front of the line. We've talked about this in a number of videos where Prism, for the first time, presented an opportunity for many WWE collectors to say, I can't afford this. And even though it was cheap and fun to begin with, and that was always sort of the what rallied the community, this was not cheap and fun. And the reason is Panini modeled this, like I've said before, in a lot of different areas, like modeled this after something that they saw is ultimately successful in other sports. So they're trying to attract people in. They're trying to attract those crossover people in. That's why rookie cards got more expensive. That's why all those things got more expensive. Why Chrome from 2014 and 2015 hit record highs. Like, it's because of all of these people coming in, because they all represent a community that has experienced all of this before and they know where to spend the money. And for a lot of them who saw the trends, wanted to get in ahead of that. And for a lot of the existing individuals, they're like, these guys are not good for me at all. Like, I don't like this. I don't like being at the back of the line. I don't like what Prism represents. I don't like what Panini represents. All of those things, like, completely understandable. But I think at the same time, there's a lot of hatred that has been sort of rallied because those that really do like Prism and really do like that it has cool cards and all those things they talked about in the first half of this video, like, those people are seen as the enemy. And that's really problematic for the overall community. Like, that's a really negative thing to happen, to the point where it's being recognized on a lot of different platforms. Like, what is with all of these Twitter beefs and blah blah blah. Like, it's childish. It's stupid, but it's understandable because it's happened. And I think if we're looking at this the way that most of the drama has sort of unfolded, it's like you're either one of the original people who collects everything that came before, or you're one of the new people. You can't be both. It's very tribal, the same way that it's AEW versus WWE. Everybody looks at this from a whataboutism type of thing, like, oh, you say this, well, what about that? Like, all of those types of drama exists because of the reaction that collectors had to Prism. There was a group of people on social media who were loud, who liked Prism. I was one of those people. I still love Prism. And there was a group of people who were very loud and hated Prism. And you had to identify with one of those sides or you were ostracized. And it's really unfortunate that it happened. But it's a natural thing that has happened within the hobby many times, whether it's the vintage baseball collectors versus the modern baseball collectors, prospecting collectors in baseball versus non-prospectors, people who see that as a waste. Like, why would you spend 15 grand on a guy that's never seen a major league at bat? Or even something like, hey, I want to collect nothing but Michael Jordan and LeBron James versus all the people who want to collect everybody else. Like, these fights happen often. That's what social media is all about. And it's unfortunate that Prism has become the lightning rod for a lot of those conversations because, for a lot of reasons, like, it shouldn't be like that. Like, really, these are really awesome cards. And historically, when awesome cards have been released, it hasn't been a tribal situation. Here, it's different because of all the people coming in. And because there's not a lot of greater hobby context for some of the people that have been a part of this sort of war, like, they're seeing this with a very narrow viewpoint. Like, why would a Prism Gold out of 10 sell for $50,000 when a Topps Gold out of 10 sells for 300? Like, there's not a lot of context there as to why these things exist the way they do. What they're discounting is that there's a number of people within the hobby outside of wrestling cards that are judging these cards by that standard. Is This is a legacy, this is something that's been around for a decade. They've always, in other sports sold for huge amounts of money, 50, $60,000. What's spending 5 grand on a Rey Mysterio? What's spending 10 grand on a Stone Cold Steve Austin if I'm spending 100 grand for Patrick Mahomes? Like all of those comparative values are really driving a lack of context for some of the people in the hobby because they've just never experienced it before. Like they think a card out of 10 should be a card out of 10. Like, why does it make this one that much more expensive? Why is this 101 black so much more valuable than a 101 from any other set? Like, really valid questions, like, no doubt about it. Like, everybody should be asking those questions, but then do the research to understand, what drove those things to be the case. Because even though the wax on Prism has dropped, the desirable rare cards are still desirable and rare, and they will achieve exponential value on top of what everything else has because that's the way it's been in every other sport. So, you're seeing WNBA cards sell for $10,000. There aren't 10,000 people that watch a WNBA game. Like, that's what's so confusing to me as a collector is like, this sport does not have any fans. It's sad that it doesn't, but it's like this sport doesn't have any fans. So why are there people spending $10,000? At least with WWE, there's billions of fans, right? Like, yeah, I'm exaggerating, but there's a lot of fans. They get 2 million people watching every week. The most people watch a WNBA game is like 500,000. Like WrestleMania is a humongous event every year that bring millions of dollars to the city that hosts it. Like those things don't happen in other sports that are niche, right? NFL, millions of people watch those games. Baseball, millions of people watch those games. It's understandable why those markets are the way they are. But Prism and the legacy behind Panini's products is driving the value. But if you don't have the experience outside of wrestling cards, you may not understand why that's the case. Why is this one card special? Like, why is a color blast that isn't numbered selling for 4 figures? Like, those are valid questions to ask. But I think the challenge is that a lot of people in the community just don't have the context or know even how to get the context that they need to see why that is what it is. Now, as we get into the larger discussion of what didn't work for Prism, like, I think that is a key element because it undermines almost everything else that I talked about in the beginning of this video. If the regular collecting base can't accept the product, then it's not going to be successful. And I think it's not going to be seen as successful regardless of what actually happens, because there's going to be a continuous negative wave of emotion tied to this. So I think overall, like there's just a general level of discontent with Prism because it represents a new approach to the hobby that wasn't there in wrestling cards before. And that's unfortunate that people aren't going to get it, but I understand why they wouldn't get it or how they would be unable to process or digest the things that are happening as a result. All right, so let's keep this going in terms of some of the things that didn't work. I talked before a lot about the landmark checklist, in my opinion, which drove a huge amount of new signers, new people, new combo signatures, new rookies, all of this into the product. What There is a really negative reason for that being a part of this as well. And I think it stems from the fact that the value delivered in the product itself is that checklist kind of works to the detriment of that. When you have a $150 box driving value at Prism with a gigantic checklist, that's beneficial. When you're at $1,000, it's completely different because then you need to rip by the case, you need to rip by multiple cases to get those product level hits that will drive the type of value to dictate $1,000 price tag. So in a lot of sports, there's a gambling aspect to how you rip a product. And I think the key here with WWE is that was never a focus before. It was always a $40 or $50 box, $100 box. The most we saw in terms of a readily available product was Undisputed, and that was like $225 a box. This was at a 1200 at its highest. So when you have a checklist that includes 300 different people all signing the product, you're going to run into issues with boxes not delivering the type of value, especially when the bulk of the product is unnumbered and those inserts aren't driving value because there's too many of them out there and they're on retail, they're in all these different areas. Like that piece of the product didn't support it. The market wasn't big enough to support it. So in order to have the type of product response, you actually need to have a tighter checklist, and Prism was the complete opposite of that. And I think that that really didn't work well in this situation because when you look at the product's configuration of, a bunch of cards, two autographs per box, one of those autographs is usually junk, like sells for less than $10. Like that leaves a huge rift in between what the product was spent to open versus what it delivered coming out of the box. In other sports, this is common. This is very common to a point where people are spending $5,000 to $10,000 on a box of cards and getting $500 in return. Like that's the gambling aspect of ripping wax, and it's also one of the major reasons why initially there was a lot of speculation about the product being up here, and it ended up being way down here. You open a box of Prism at $1,000, the chance that you get your money back is very, very slim because there's such a wide variety of people that you can pull. Buying singles, different story, because then you're dictating how much you're spending on a specific card versus the chance that you can pull something big. Sure, you can pull a gold Hulk Hogan and it sells for $10,000, or you could also pull a gold of Ivar and it sells for $20. Like there's this huge discrepancy between the product level hits and the everyday hits that make it easily accessible in other sports because those product level hits are in the 6 and 7 figures sometimes, whereas the um, WWE stuff, the max you hit is probably 50K, unless you get one of like the super rare one-on-ones like of The Rock, which drives potentially more than that. So if you were to pull the top rookie in basketball or the top rookie in football, it's a $100,000 card. Mac Jones was pulled out of Prizm football, $100,000 card, and that's a built in. It happened right away. It was a very publicized sale. Like those are not uncommon in sports products. But the gold Mac Jones in football is also selling for a ton of money, or was before he shit the bed in the during the season, or like Cade Cunningham in basketball, or even Luka Doncic and Patrick Mahomes before. Like those cards were immediately going to be worth a ton of money because there were hundreds and hundreds of people that wanted to buy them. Here you have a very specific top tier of people. You have The Rock, you have Hulk Hogan, you have Stone Cold Steve Austin, a few others, but most of the other people are not going to have the level of market to drive a gigantic price that would necessitate a box price of 1,000 to 1,200 bucks. Now, we thought as a market, we being the WWE's sort of collectors, thought that initially, based on the speculation, things were going to continue to be more and more expensive, and people would continue to see value in the out of 99 parallels, the orange that represent those, or the insert parallels, or the autographs, or whatever it is that would be enough to sustain the product long term. But because of the things that happen with Prism, the top sell for a ton of money and the bottom sells for nothing. Like that happens in basketball, it happens in football, it happens everywhere. Like that checklist really weighed on people opening those boxes. So I think like that was a huge detriment. Even though I loved having so many different people that you want as a rookie, so many people you want that have never had cards before, or never signed before. Like if you don't pull the top stuff when you're ripping, all of a sudden your value is sunk. So I think like that was a huge problem coming into this as well. I wasn't as keen to that because I didn't think about it from that perspective. I'm not usually ripping Prism wax. I'm buying singles. And so it was hard to sort of contextualize that, especially when you have collectors who want to get the best stuff and can't afford it anymore. And they're very bitter or angry that they can't afford those things because for a long time, a rock card out of 10, just a normal tops parallel sells for 150, 200 bucks. Here it's 20,000, $30,000, and I was explaining before. So I think that was really a huge problem coming into this. Um, Additionally, like there's just a lot of problems that happen when you are dealing with a Prism product that is produced at a level multiple times that of what a normal tops product. Like we thought, we were discussing on social media as this was coming out. Like I think there was some conjectures that 10,000 plus cases were produced of this. I don't know what the actual number is. I haven't done the math. You can find out the number by looking at pack odds and looking at the checklist and sort of determining that, no wrestling product was produced as much as Prism was. And then to see that it also was produced in retail, and then again in an Asia exclusive configuration, like there's a lot of the stuff to go around. And the difference between the WWE market and the NBA market and the NFL market is like there's just not as many people there yet. And so without a market to really buy in and buy in and buy in and buy in, things usually go down. This, combined with all the economic things that I was discussing earlier, really contributed to an even more rapid downfall. So I think, people are assigning like, hey, Prism sucks because the wax started here and went here. Like, I think that's a really narrow viewpoint of things, as I've said, and I think there's a lot of good stuff to consider. But yeah, it did drop a considerable amount, and something I didn't really expect to happen as fast as it did. I also didn't expect to be here and things like the Tom Brady's losing 75% of their value, Jordan going from $750,000 down to $200,000 on his rookie card. Like, those are not things we expected to happen this quickly. Like, it's really sort of gone off a cliff across a number of places in the hobby. But to see that it did perform at what it did, even now, like in September to October, we've seen huge sales from Prism that has we never expected to happen. But yeah, it did it like the bulk product, unnumbered hits, waves, silvers, reds, like they were readily available and really tanked. It also didn't help that there were 10,000 auctions that were listed on eBay, all with a very similar stopping time. So there's a lot of deals to be had, and like, and that's why I thought, hey, if we can get through the phase where the auctions are ending and we're into a spot now, even today, where numbered parallels are hard to find, like especially as you get into the lower numbered parallels, like there's still people searching for their first gold of the person that they collect. Like, there are not many of these cards that have surfaced because the product is humongous, the run. So you're having a lot of problems with people who want cards for their collection, and they're not able to find them because they're either being sold privately, they're not available on eBay, they haven't been pulled yet, they're sent off to grading. Like, all of these things contribute. So as we get long term into, okay, now we're in year two, now we're in year three. Like, is that same thing going to happen? I don't know. Like, I think there's a lot of things to be excited about for Prism next year. We're going to have Cody Rhodes coming in. We're going to have guys like Bray Wyatt, Braun Strowman, if you like that kind of wrestling. Like, there's a lot of guys that weren't included from a veteran side, whether that's Randy Savage, Ric Flair, like you name it. Like, there's a lot of additional names that could really sort of bring an evolution to this product that, from a design perspective, from a superstar quality perspective, that I don't think was given a shot. Like, remember, Panini was only able to produce this product from January 1st to April. And although they probably started designing it well ahead of that, like the production of the cards really was a short time frame. And that's really what led to another huge issue, which is the QC. Quality control in Prism was a disaster. Like, there were major problems. Like, we saw off-centered cards, damaged cards, like you name it, packs not including what they were supposed to include. Like, that was a really big problem too, and contributed to a lot of people being frustrated with how the stuff sort of played out. So I think overall, like, it's not like there shortage of negative issues. I just think from a collector perspective, like me, who's somebody who has gotten almost the entire rainbow, including the black of my person, like, that was fun. Like, that was something we hadn't really experienced before. Like, Topps Chrome in wrestling was really kind of 5 parallels, 6 parallels. It was easy to open, easy to get to, wasn't too expensive until it was because product dried up. Like, this was the first experience we've had with really chasing an NFL level rainbow at like 20 to 30 parallels. For somebody like me that gets bored because there's not a lot coming out or whatever, like, those types of things are fun chases. It was really fun to track down all of that stuff. It was fun to watch the breaks. It was fun to participate in breaks. All of that stuff really did drive a really cool experience for especially those wrestling collectors that did have that crossover, right? So if you were like me and had collected football, had collected basketball, had collected baseball, and you were really waiting for wrestling to get into sort of that level of focus, like, this is something that is never happened before in wrestling. Like we never had a true sort of NFL style type product. And for a lot of those people, that's a new experience. But there may have been too much focus in delivering that experience versus delivering value in the wax, which I think really contributed a huge part of the collecting hobby feeling like, wow, I don't want to buy Prism wax because it's garbage. And they're not wrong. Like in a lot of ways, the Prism boxes themselves didn't deliver very much value. But if you were looking at it from the perspective of like, I want cool cards for my collection, there is no better product that I've seen for WWE determining the level of coolness, the value in the cards, like all of that stuff doesn't really have a competitor. Now, Select came out and really sort of redefined what um, fun cards could look like, what cool cards could look like, but the Select cards aren't achieving the value that the Prism cards are. And although they look great and they do all these other things, like Select is probably my favorite WWE product ever built. Prism is a completely different experience because the values of the rare and desirable cards are just off the charts, and that's cool too. Like I think there's so much audience now in WWE that you can play to different segments of the market like this and give something for the set collectors, like we saw with Select, or give something for the hit chasers like we did with Impeccable, or give something for the rainbow collectors like we did with Prism. Like there is so much now available. And to see that people have approached this with, if you like Prism, I don't like you, like that's the way my 5-year-old looks at things. Like that's really problematic. And it sucks that that's really the case that it's been, is like, oh, this guy is one of those investors. I don't like him because he represents that person. Like I've met a lot of people who I should clash with in terms of my views versus their views, but they're great people to have conversations with. They're great people to enjoy the hobby with. And even though they may approach the hobby differently, it doesn't mean that you have to literally spew anger and venom their way because of this. Now, personally, I don't really care. Like I don't really care how what people think of me personally. But I think giving this sort of educational level to people to understand why things are the way they are is really important, which is why I've made a lot of these videos. So I think as we sort of get down the path of like, okay, now we're in year 2, now we're in year 3, I'm hoping that we've put this tribalism behind us. I know that that's a pipe dream because I see what's going on with all the other tribal fights in the hobby, all the other tribal fights in WWE versus AEW, whatever. Like that stuff never goes away. And so I realize that, that is an unlikely scenario that people will all of a sudden just accept that everybody's going to be here and no one's really sort of going to go away. Like that's never going to happen. But I do hope that, through these educational videos, at least some of the people that don't have that context will get some of that context, and have the opportunity to understand maybe, hey, this isn't something that we're doing because whether it's somebody saying, I like Prism, I like what Prism represents, I like that, whatever. We're not doing that because it's, you know, trying to make our own collections more valuable. I don't plan on selling any of this stuff. It's more to just say like, hey, wrestling cards are cool, and it's fun to be a part of a hobby that considers wrestling cards to be worthwhile to invest time and energy in. And I think that will only benefit us long term. So in conclusion, and as we sort of wrap up this video, like there's a lot of challenge that we're facing as a wrestling card community, as a hobby community, because of the challenges with the downturns. But I will say this, like the stuff that Prism has brought to the forefront, and the stuff that Prism has brought to the wrestling card hobby cannot be denied. And it's something that, it's an impactful situation, regardless if you feel it's positive or negative. And I think that as more of this is released, and there will be more of it, and more people come to the hobby to enjoy it, like I would really hope, like we've all been a new person at some point in wrestling cards. We've all been a new person, I hope, in some case with sports cards. Like take the time to understand the person's viewpoints and why they are, instead of just saying, well, you like Prism, I don't like you. Like I get it. Like no one wants to be invaded from an outside force. No one who has been in a hobby likes to see it go a direction that they don't feel is right. But I can tell you this, like this has happened before in every aspect of the hobby. This type of mentality will ultimately be the type of mentality that engulfs any collecting community, because collecting is ultimately rooted in value. And when value is involved, more people come to enjoy it. So I think like that's what's happened with shoes. That's what happened with comics. That's what happened with sports cards. That's what happens with video games. You name it. Everybody fights against that tide. No one wins. it's better to have a positive experience with the people that are coming in and becoming friends of yours, contacts of yours, colleagues of yours, because you can build up a community around the things that you enjoy while still not being a complete and utter jerk to people who don't fit the means in which you collect. Like, everybody has their reasons for doing what they're doing. And I think it's unfair to look at somebody the way that they are just because they collect differently than you do. So just it's not really something that a lot of people like to talk about, and it's not a lot of things that really drive, positive experiences on social media. And I'm ready to have those debates. I welcome the arguments. I don't welcome sort of the venom that has come from the community, but I realize that it's something that's inevitable, and I've come to accept it and made peace with it. So overall, like, this has been a really fun experience. I hope this video has been educational. I hope we can all sort of take this context and apply it to the other conversations, because there's a lot of viewpoints that are out there. Prism has been a really, really conversed upon topic. So I encourage you to go read the other opinions. I'm not the only one sharing my own. So, anyways, thanks again for watching. Hopefully, you've made it this far. Follow me on social media. I'm on Instagram at WWE Gelman. I'm on Twitter at SC Uncensored. You can visit my website, www.sportscardsuncensored.com. There's a link on the side that just thousands of words worth of Prism reviews and stuff like that, commentary on the situation. You can take a look there. I encourage you to do so. Anyways, thanks again, guys. We'll talk soon.